Just when you thought it was safe to watch videos again on the internet comes Tales from Someplace Besides the Garage.
Hey folks, I'm back. Doing another video, and it's not even a week later after my last one. Why am I doing another video? Maybe because I'm bored. It's weird here in the US, we're experiencing quite a lot of very cold weather. We had snow this morning, only got a few inches, so thankfully it's not a snowstorm. Though I know a lot of the folks that, at least some of my good buddies out there are experiencing very cold weather, I'm sure, out where they are, if not snowstorms. But this time of year, man, I tell you, the cold really bothers me now, and maybe it's because I've become diabetic in the last couple of years. That's probably it. I've never had the cold bother me to this extent, where I can't even open my door and I get this chill, you know. But anyway, the thing that I still like about this time of year, when it snows like this, it's the only time that during the daytime, it's dead quiet out. And, you know, if you have a snowstorm, now partially maybe it's because the snow muffles a lot of sound. But we didn't really have a snowstorm. It's more of a couple inches here and there. It's not really even on the roads now. The roads have either been cleared, I guess, or just from cars driving over it, it's clear. So pretty much the snow is only in the grassy areas. And yet we still got that stillness. I guess, you know, people avoid going out. I guess is a big part of it. You don't hear a lot of activity outside. You know, I'll look out the window, which I do a lot. I always have, and you just don't see anybody. You see the cars parked there or whatever, but you just don't see anybody hanging around outside. You know, I think the only people that are outside are actually like the people that are walking their dogs in my condo complex here, and maybe the few brave souls who are exercise fanatics and really go out there regardless of what the weather is and do their thing. I haven't seen any of them today, but I may not have been looking out at the right moment. But anyway, last night, you know, again, I've fallen into this really bad habit of sleeping a lot during the day and not very much at night. And it's about 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm getting frustrated because I can't fall asleep. And the snow hadn't started yet, I don't think. But it was definitely in the offing. You could definitely feel the vibe of it, you know, with that kind of the overcastness, and you know the snow was probably coming. It was very cold, and of course they predicted it. So it's middle of the night, so everything's very still out there. And I got in my head, for some reason, you know, I always have music running through my head anyway. I started thinking of a John Abercrombie track. Evensong, which is the last track on his Characters album, which I still have my vinyl of, but I also have 2 CD copies because I would never be without this. And recorded November 77. So I tend to remember when it was recorded for a lot of reasons. Well, I probably bought the album in 78, and John was a new acquisition, somebody that I just learned about. But 77 was a big year for me because I graduated high school and kind of went out into the world. So it's always been probably the biggest single marker year in my life to date. Because all of this, you know, because my whole life changed at that point. And, you know, I had to make decisions for myself, I guess, pretty much from that point. Whereas before you're in school, everything's basically decided for you. And so 77 has probably been the biggest earmark in my life. And so when I pick up an album, even now, you know, that was recorded back then, it really stands out for me because I can remember exactly where I was and what I was doing and what was going on in my life and all that. And that marker to adulthood kind of started, the clock started right there for me. And the last track on here, Evensong, is the quote-unquote Spacious Thing on here. It's the only track where John uses like an electric guitar with a volume pedal, so you have these soft swells of chords. And it's one of my favorite pieces on the album, if not my favorite piece. And this is definitely my favorite John Abercrombie album, and it's also the only one. I've talked about this one ad nauseum, I know. But it's also the only one that he played all the instruments himself, his only all-solo album. I always wished he would have done another one. And so I did something I rarely do today, later on in the day. Well, I did play this track at 2:30 in the morning, but later on in the day I also put on the full album. And to me, it's a nighttime album, so it's an album I rarely really play during the day, unless I'm like driving with it in a car or something like that. But because of that stillness from the winter time and the snow on the ground out there, it has, this is the only time of year when you get days like this that has that nighttime vibe during the day. So this pretty much suited well with it. I mean, John only plays guitars and electric mandolin on here, so there's no drums, there's no percussion, there's nothing wild or loud, there's no distorted guitar leads or anything like that. So it's a very low-key album anyway, so it's very well suited to the night, but also to still moments as well. And it got me thinking about a thread that anybody would be great if they picked up on. Playing this again today, thinking about it, all the years I've had it, with all the thousands of things I have too, I realized that this album in particular, which I also have on CD naturally, which is really where I listen to it from, is easily one of my most played albums in my entire life, regardless of genre or anything. I have a lot of favorite, quote-unquote favorite albums, and a lot of albums that have got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of plays over the years, but there's also periods of time where I didn't listen to them for whatever reason, usually just over familiarity. And maybe a couple of years would go by, or maybe even longer, where I didn't play them. But I can honestly say this is just about one of the very few albums I can think of that I've never had this gap of not listening to it, of putting it down for 2 or 3 years or more and not playing it. And it's easy to do with favorite albums, because sometimes you just get overexposed to them. And as much as you love them, it's like, yeah, I've heard it all before, and I wish I could kind of erase some of my memories of it so it was fresher and newer when I played it, which is, why some of your favorite albums don't get played sometimes for long periods. But this one, I just don't recall throughout my whole life since the late 70s ever not playing it for any extended period of time. And certainly not in the last... I've been here 6 years now. I moved here 6 years ago, and I know I've been playing it consistently all that time. It was one of the first CDs I bought when CDs came out. Interestingly, it seemed like there were more things that I wanted to repurchase from my vinyl selection at the time in the mid-'80s than there were necessarily new things coming out that were, new, not new to CD, but rather new releases that were coming out on CD at the time. I bought a whole lot of those too. But I don't know, it seems like there was, especially ECM albums, that there were a lot of favorites of mine over the years that I'd listened to that I thought, wow, I really want to get on this new medium, this new CD medium, especially something like this that's quiet and things that don't have drums, taking up that kind of acoustic space. So things like Tertiary After the Rain, which is, a pretty quiet album. Yeah, there's electric guitar in there, but there's no rhythm section or anything like that going on. And so it really, listening to this again for the 5,000th time today, really dawned on me, wow, I think this has got to be one of the most listened to recordings that I own. So if anybody's interested in picking up that thread, and that's if you can even recall what it, it's until I played this, it may not have been that obvious to me. But I just, even now I'm going through my memory of what else have I played as much as this, and I can think of things that I've played consistently through the years, but probably not as much as this. So John's not with us anymore, and it's certainly a testament to his talents. So I thought I'd come on and talk about that a little bit. And also, it's weird. I might be the only person that does a video talking about albums that I pull out from my collection just to talk about them. And I haven't specifically necessarily listened to them prior to making the video, even though I have listened to them in the past. So I tend to do these videos, and then after I do them, it's like, of whatever album I'm talking about, I tend to go, yeah, I gotta listen to that. So after I make the video, I start getting on this thread of really listening to albums again. And I did that video on compilations, my last video talking about compilation albums, which are in general not my favorite things. And I spoke about the one type of compilations that I do gravitate a bit more towards are classical things, because I am not that well versed in classical music. And I showed I've got these night music. I've got volumes 6 through 10, and I showed them, though I hadn't listened to them prior to showing them, just as an example of compilations that I do like. And there's really nothing extraordinarily special about these, except they all have great covers. They're great pieces, and they're great quality recordings on the Naxos label, by the way. And I forget how many, there might be like 30 volumes of this, but I have 5 of them, and I'll be damned if I didn't put them on and play them several times in a row, all 5 discs, which runs for 6 hours. And just really nice, a lot of things that you would be familiar with that you've heard over the years, and a lot of things that are new. They flow really, for a compilation of classical music, they flow very well because they pretty much kept to marring pieces together that work well together, but it's mostly orchestral music. So, I don't recall hearing a lot of like piano solo things or anything like that. It's mostly orchestral, so it kind of works real nice. So I've actually been listening to those classical compilations, and to stay on the thread a little bit of things I've been listening to lately, here's a weird one. Now, I consider this Manuel Gottsching's album, which was recorded in 77, interestingly enough. I didn't even attempt to tie that together with the John Abercrombie being recorded in 77, but it was. I have 2 favorite Gottsching albums, these 2. Now, this one is not as well known, Dream and Desire, which according to the liner notes was recorded in 77, but it didn't get released until the 90s? Yeah, the early 90s. It just sat on the shelf. Don't know why. I believe it was soundtrack music, possibly. But not when you listen to it, it's like, soundtrack music, there's a 30-minute piece on here. So I'm not really sure what, so much that it was used for soundtrack or why the delay in it coming out. Now, it actually is tied, being my favorite Manuel Gottsching or Ashra album, with the very well-known New Age of Earth album, which is listed under the name of Ashra, but once again is Manuel Gottsching totally solo with no other musicians, which is the way I prefer to hear him. And this is my other favorite album of his, which I've been listening to, really because I pulled this one out to listen to, and they go together like peanut butter and jelly kind of thing. Oddly enough, also recorded in 1977, except for this one did come out right after it was recorded. So this one's been out there in public since at least 77 or 78. And again, it's him all solo. It's Manuel all solo. And I tend to pull this one out and play it whenever I play this one. And this one is unique in that back when I did my video about Halloween music and music I associate with Halloween that isn't specifically tied to the holiday, this is one of them. I always talk about, because there's this sound effect there's a long 26-minute piece on here that has this kind of sound effect, I guess you would call it, coming from the synthesizer that kind of runs throughout the entire piece that to me sounds like a ghost. So from getting that in my head, from when I first got the album years ago, I always kind of ended up tying it in with Halloween and pulling this album out to play at Halloween. However, it's actually the only Halloween album that I have two associations with in terms of time of year. Because of the quiet electronic nature of this album, I also associate it with the wintertime, and specifically the very still winter days when there's snow on the ground like there is today. And I think it's just about the only album that I have like those two real strong holiday or time of year associations with that are two different times of year. I mean, Halloween is one thing, and most of the albums that get in my head as being Halloween type albums, I don't necessarily have other associations with in terms of, they're not also summer albums or spring albums or winter albums, except for this one. This one is rare in that because it's got that winter vibe going on. And it's one of those albums that after I spin it, I'm always kind of in the mood for more. And what else would be perfect but the other album that he recorded the same year in '77, which is pretty much the same type, almost like a different, like they're two different versions of the same music in a way. They could have easily been a double album. The instrumentation is the same, it sounds like, and because it was recorded at the same time, it appears to me to be that the instrumentation is the same synthesizers used, etc., on both records, and they just go together well, and this is extremely well known. Probably, I would say, could be his best known album, possibly, even to this day, and thankfully Manuel is still out there doing his thing. He does probably more live appearances in Europe, at least, oddly enough, than he makes albums. He doesn't record a whole lot anymore, or at least there's large kind of gaps between his albums. Really nice guy, though. I'm not really a Facebook fan, but I got on Facebook because Manuel Gotching himself is on there, and I had a couple nice exchanges back and forth with him, and he's a really nice guy. And there's a few other musicians who otherwise wouldn't talk to me, in the real world. So it's that's the reason why sometimes I will go on Facebook and look at things, and every once in a while he posts things up. And I actually found a nice interview with him on YouTube recently. And I don't think the interview isn't necessarily a new one, but something done within the last, say, 8 years or so. And it could be much newer than that, I'm not even sure. But it was something that I hadn't seen before, and I believe it's him sitting at home. There's a guy interviewing him, and he's sitting in a music room. And I think it's in his home, so it's quite interesting to see. And he's a really nice, very, very laid-back kind of guy. What else have I got going on? Just so I want to push this video over the 8-hour mark, and make it a record. So what else am I going to talk about so that you have to take a day off work to watch the whole video? The only other thing I am going to talk about today, but I promise I'll go on for at least 7 hours about it, is I have been recording. Not that anybody cares, which is why I'm putting that at the end of the video. And I actually have the album cover done. This is the first, before the music. So I have the album. Here's what it's going to look like on the CD, the cover. Strangely, a photograph that I found. I knew I took it years ago. At least 7-8 years ago. But I don't have any recollection of it. But it was in my folder of photographs that I had taken. I would love to know where it is, but I don't know where it is. But it's one of those things I at the time, always carried some kind of little digital camera with me in case I came across something scenic. And I don't know where I was when I took it. And I think I may have even been driving. I took a photo out the window because it was so stunning. Or I might have pulled off to the side of the road to take a picture, or parked somewhere. But it's kind of blurry in a very artistic way, which tends to make me think I was actually in motion when I took it. And there was two photographs that were nearly identical, and I think I did kind of hold the camera kind of toward the passenger side window of the car and just take a couple snaps, because there's one that's almost identical like it, but you can tell it's taken at the same time or immediately after that, but the angles were kind of messed up. So it's interesting that I would love to know where I took a photo of. Had to have been around here, I'm guessing, but I don't know. And you could never. There's no giveaways in the photo that could ever really place it. I wish there was a sign or some type or something like that. So it's interesting. So it's a bit abstract even to me. And I started back in late November. I was messing around with. I have a guitar synthesizer. It doesn't really work, and I think it's the pickup that goes on the guitar. And I was messing around with moving the pickup on my electric guitar to try to get it to work. And it kind of works sometimes, but doesn't work other times. And at other times, it just cuts off suddenly and stops working in the middle of a note kind of thing while you're playing. So it's very frustrating. But I did find a couple settings for some reason on the synthesizer that worked without giving me too many headaches. And it was nice because I haven't had it to use for over a year now. My old electric guitar broke, and the pickup was mounted perfectly on that one. And with the crappy new guitar that I bought, it just doesn't seem to work with it. So it's probably, I don't know, it's probably not the synthesizer itself. It could be either defect in the pickup or just the way that this pickup doesn't like the particular electric guitar that I have it mounted to. I'm not sure. So I wasn't really able to use it for a couple of years, which really hurt me in terms of creativity. But back in November, I was farting around on the only electric guitar I have now, which is definitely a budget model, and I was able to get a couple settings that worked without too many difficulties at the time. And in one day, I recorded this kind of 24.5-minute piece using like an orchestral setting, very ambient nature, which will come as no surprise to people who know my music. And I really liked the way it came out. And over the course of the next month, even though the basic track was actually, believe it or not, it was fine the way it was. Very minimal, which would be no surprise to those who know my music as well. But over the course of the next month, I started adding little things to it. But the little things I added were way down in the mix, so very subtle. And almost so you can't even tell from the original file, the original music that I made, that there was even anything added to it. It kind of still sounds like that one live thing that I did, with the orchestral setting. But there's subtle things in the background, they're way down in the mix that I hope enhanced it. And that came just as a result of fooling around with this guitar synthesizer, trying to get it up and working again. And from there, I decided, after listening to it every day, multiple times when I first made it, and saying, gee, I really like this. And it was just me kind of like, being inspired by the moment by having this guitar synthesizer kind of working again, at least minimally. And I thought, well, gee, does this piece have any value to it, kind of thing? And it did, and it does. And I listened to it, and I kind of thought, oh, that's it. That's the first part of a new album. So I've got several short individual pieces that have been done over the last X amount, 5, 6, 7 years, whatever it is, that I've not been able to fit on an album because I want them to flow. I don't want to just throw them on because I've got them done. So I've got just a few things that I'm waiting for the right partners in music to marry to. And I had this one old thing that I think is from 2011, which would have been from before I moved here even. And it was a file that I had actually lost at least lost. It was buried in my computer somewhere, and I didn't listen to it for ages and ages. And it was actually in my old computer. And thankfully, maybe by accident, I did have it transferred to my newer computer, which I got a couple years ago. But I hadn't heard it for several years. And I came across it. It's this little thing that's like 1 minute and 15 seconds. And at first I thought it was just too weird. It's a weird thing. You can't feel harmonically where it is, but it ends nicely. And after listening to a bunch of oddball guitar music that wasn't mine recently, I decided, gee, I think this might work in here. You know, with putting it with this other nice, pretty ambient piece, this weird acoustic guitar thing that just doesn't sound right. And so I took that piece. There was another piece that I did in, I think it's 2016. And it was just me improvising on the nylon string classical guitar with a lot of added reverb, so it's very moody and atmospheric and kind of drenched in reverb, which I really liked. And by the time I got those together, I'm like, well, I've got like half of an album, more than half of an album here. So it dawned on me after the fact that everything of these like 4 pieces that I've gathered together, 3 or 4 pieces I've gathered together, 3, I guess, at that point, that everything was done on various types of guitars. And I got in my head a concept for the album. Maybe I will just do things derived entirely from guitar and not involve other instruments. But then I entered this kind of period where I couldn't come up with anything. And I'm like, well, I don't want to make the album suffer musically just because I'm trying to push this concept. So for a while I got into the part that maybe I'll just, you know, put other pieces in there that do have other instrumentation on there, and it won't be just about guitars, because I was getting ideas for other things too. And then I hit on a couple things totally by accident, and I did another piece, but another piece that was entirely guitars, and so I had like a 4th piece to add there, and I'm like, I think I am going to do this guitar thing, you know, because now I've realized I can't, without suffering, say, musically or conceptually or as a listening experience, I can do an entire album that's just guitars without it really being dumbed down or having the concept really make it a lesser album because I didn't include other instrumentation. And actually now I haven't recorded the other pieces, but I've got probably more ideas than I could even put on here, I think, unless I pull something off, I don't know, where everything I have left, I can pretty much, you know, the concepts I have for other pieces, I can do entirely on guitars. And when you hear it, you won't think it's a guitar album because of the rather extensive use of guitar synthesizers, which you'll be sure that you're hearing keyboards, but you're not. So I think that's going to be my next thing. And then after that, you know, hopefully it'll get done, I'd probably go back to doing something which has a whole lot of different instruments around. I haven't done anything for a while that had any kind of actual acoustic percussion in, which I love. I love recording acoustic percussion stuff. So that would probably be in the offing for the next thing, is getting back to having some acoustic percussion, and of course, like, definitely keyboards on the next thing. But I'm really digging this this guitar concept. I didn't want to really push the concept of it, as I said, but it's working. I've been listening to the files that I have. I got about 39 minutes worth of music so far. I think some people would put that out as an album nowadays, because albums, I noticed, have been getting shorter and shorter. But I think it needs more. I have like a suite of smaller, shorter sections that I'm tying together that I think needs more in there. So I'm continuing on, and I don't know when it will be done, but I will certainly probably be talking about it, you know, in future videos as well, should any progress be made. And I actually did record last night. I did record the start of another section yet for it. So, and that was some acoustic guitars. So I think it's creeping along, and I definitely want to do it because I'm out of money, folks. So I need to get a job soon, and once I have to start doing that again, I don't know how much time I'm going to have to record music until I actually retire. You know, I don't know. I've never been good at time management, really. When I recorded my Impressions of a Year CD, it took me 16 or 17 months to do that. Because I was working full time, and I had put everything on the shelf besides my job at the time, my office job. I would come home and very quickly eat and just work on music, and I did that pretty much exclusively for like 16 months. And you know, everything was on the. I put everything on the shelf when I did that recording, and for over a year, and. That wasn't enjoyable because it was work. You know, I was happy with the results, obviously, when something came out, but it was a lot to, you know, to pretty much put everything up on the shelf, including, like, you know, pretty much all your leisure time. So that's what's going on. This video, again, went much longer than I anticipated. So I'm sorry for that, but that's an update. That's what's going on. If you've got an album that you think you could pull out, or albums, maybe more than one, that you think are something that you've listened to, you know, the top of your line, the things that you've listened to the most over the years, I'd love to hear it, or see it in the video especially. Okay, guys, I'm going now. I'll be back in a few days, if not sooner. Take care.